The gray skies over Westchester, New York, hung low that morning when Marcus Hale, a quiet man in his 30s with a slight limp, arrived at his late father's estate. His cane tapped against the cobblestone driveway, a sound his family had learned to tune out. Inside, his older brother Calvin, sister Renee, and their mother Patricia Hale sat around the dining table surrounded by papers and realtors. "You're late," Calvin said, barely glancing up. "You said we were discussing Dad's will," Marcus replied. "We did," Renee interrupted, smiling thinly. "And the lawyer said since you can't manage a property this size, it's best you take a small settlement." Marcus frowned. "Settlement?" Dad left the house to all three of us. Patricia sighed, not with concern, but with that tired tone of justification. "Sweetheart, you have limitations. You can't handle upkeep or business. Calvin and Renee can. They'll make sure you're comfortable." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Comfortable? I worked with Dad every summer on this property. You think my limb means I can't own land?" Calvin leaned back in his chair, his voice sharp. "Be real, Marcus. You're not capable of running anything. You should be grateful we're even cutting you a check." A chill ran through Marcus. He looked at their smug faces and realized this wasn't a discussion. It was a decision they'd already made. That night, he returned to his small apartment on the south side of town, same place he'd lived since his accident at 22, when a construction beam crushed his leg. He sat at his desk, opened a folder labeled Dad's Will, Copy, and reread it under a flickering lamp. There was equal ownership among the three siblings. No clause, no restriction, just fairness. He closed the file slowly. Then he picked up his phone and called someone he hadn't spoken to in years. "This is attorney Susan Garrett," a confident voice answered. "Susan," he said, "it's Marcus Hale. I think my family just stole my inheritance." A week later, the Hale siblings were summoned to court. Calvin and Renee arrived with smug confidence, joking with their mother in the hallway. Marcus entered quietly with Susan by his side, wearing a simple gray suit and steady eyes. When the judge asked if they'd reached an agreement, Susan spoke first. "Your Honor, my client was intentionally defrauded by his siblings through a falsified settlement and unauthorized sale attempt to share property." Calvin rolled his eyes. "Your Honor, my brother isn't mentally or physically capable of managing." "Capable?" Susan interrupted. "The only thing he's incapable of is being manipulated quietly." The courtroom buzzed. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have evidence of fraudulent intent?" Susan handed over a flash drive. Emails between Calvin and Renee discussing how to convince Marcus to take less, signed digital contracts with altered clauses, and recordings of their private realtor meetings. Renee's face drained of color. Patricia whispered something in panic. Calvin tried to recover. "We were protecting him." "By cutting him out his father's will," the judge asked coldly. The hearing stretched into days. Every lie the Hales told came undone. Every altered line, every text, every smirk. When the judgment came, the courtroom was silent. The judge read slowly. "Given the fraudulent alteration of inheritance documents and the unlawful exclusion of a co-heir, this court rules in favor of Mr. Marcus Hale. The estate property, including the Hale residence and its assets, shall be transferred fully and solely to him." Gasps filled the room. Marcus didn't smile. He simply breathed. The kind of breath that tastes like freedom. Calvin shot to his feet. "You can't do this. That's our family home." "You sold your share the moment you forged those emails," the judge replied sternly. Patricia's hands trembled. "Marcus, you wouldn't put your mother out of a home, would you?" He looked at her, heart heavy. "Mom, you watched them humiliate me. You said nothing. Dad taught us to stand by what's right, and that's what I'm doing." He turned to the bailiff. "I'll make sure they get time to move out." Susan patted his shoulder gently. "Justice doesn't always roar," she whispered. "Sometimes it just signs papers." Weeks later, Marcus stood alone on the porch of the Hale estate, the same porch where his siblings once laughed at his cane. Now, it was silent, except for the sound of autumn leaves brushing across the steps. He looked toward the old oak tree and whispered, "We did it, Dad." A black sedan pulled up beside the driveway. Inside sat his lawyer, smiling. "So, Mr. Hale, what do you plan to do with all this property?" He smiled faintly. "Turn it into something good. Maybe a rehabilitation center. For people who lost things they thought they'd never get back." Never mistake silence for weakness. The quiet ones often have the strongest evidence. They mocked his new rehab center until their own scandal made them beg to be admitted. The third day in court felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Reporters whispered. Lawyers shuffled papers. And Marcus Hale, Kane resting beside him, steady, silent, sat watching the family who had once called him a burden. Calvin's expensive suit looked a little less confident. Renee's makeup couldn't hide her nerves. Patricia, their mother, clutched her purse so tight her knuckles whitened. Across the aisle, Attorney Susan Garrett rose to deliver her closing statement. Her voice was low, but sharp enough to cut glass. "Your Honor, my client didn't ask for pity. He asked for fairness. His siblings chose greed over blood. They forged clauses, falsified signatures, and tried to erase his name from his father's legacy. They underestimated him because of a limp. But the only true disability here was moral." The courtroom murmured. Even the judge paused before nodding for her to continue. "We're not here to debate capability. We're here to uphold justice. And justice doesn't limp. It stands tall, even when men like Calvin Hale try to knock it down." Susan returned to her seat. Marcus met her gaze, grateful but quiet. When the judge finally spoke, his words were deliberate and cold as marble. The evidence shows deliberate deception by the defendants, Calvin and Renee Hale. The court finds in favor of Mr. Marcus Hale. All estate assets, including property, land titles, and remaining trusts, are to be transferred to his sole ownership. The gavel struck. The echo was louder than applause. Calvin's jaw dropped. Renee's tears smeared her mascara. Patricia gasped, half rising from her seat. "Your Honor, he's my son too. And you watch him be stripped of his rights." The judge replied. Court dismissed. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed. Marcus walked slowly down the steps, cane tapping against each stone. A journalist shouted, "Mr. Hale, how does it feel to own the entire estate now?" He smiled faintly. "Feels like the law finally remembered me." Behind him, his siblings argued with reporters, shouting about betrayal, family, and misunderstanding. But no one was listening anymore, because for once, the quiet brother had the louder story. 2 weeks later, moving trucks lined the old Hale estate driveway. Calvin and Renee packed the last of their things while pretending not to see Marcus standing by the gate. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just watched. When Patricia walked past, she stopped, eyes watery. "Marcus, please. I made mistakes. But this house..." He nodded. "You'll always have a place in my life, Mom. But this house isn't for comfort anymore. It's for purpose." She looked confused. "Purpose? Dad wanted this property to help people. That's what I'm doing." A month later, construction began. The old Hale Estate sign came down. A new one went up. Hale Rehabilitation Center. Strength rises again. Wheelchair ramps replaced marble steps. Therapy rooms filled the old ballroom. And on opening day, a line of patients, veterans, accident survivors, and amputees stood outside waiting for hope. Marcus greeted them one by one. His limp was still there, but so was his pride. Inside his office, Susan handed him a folder. "Everything's finalized. You own the full property outright." "Good," he said softly. "Then let's make it work for people who never had a chance." She smiled. Karma came full circle, Marcus. He looked out the window. Sunlight spilling over the same lawn where he once felt unwelcome. "No," he said. "Justice did. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the sound of someone gathering every receipt."